The crack of Tommy Hayes' spine echoed through the Reno Rodeo arena like a gunshot, silencing 6,000 spectators in an instant. The 24-year-old bull rider's body hit the dirt with a sickening finality, his neck twisted at an impossible angle, limbs sprawled motionless in the dust. Above him, Steelshot, the legendary black bull that had never been successfully ridden, snorted once and walked away, his work complete in just under 6 seconds. Time stopped. The festive atmosphere of Nevada's biggest rodeo evaporated as reality crashed down on everyone present. Children pointed in confusion, while their parents covered their eyes. Seasoned cowboys who had witnessed countless wrecks knew immediately this was different. This was the kind of fall that ended more than careers. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was already sprinting across the arena before Tommy's body came to rest. 20 years of rodeo medicine had prepared her for broken bones, concussions, and torn ligaments, but the way Tommy lay motionless, his eyes open but his body completely still, told her this was the call she had always dreaded receiving. "Don't move him," she shouted to the rodeo clowns who instinctively rushed to help. "Nobody touch him." Tommy's consciousness remained intact, trapped inside a body that no longer responded to his commands. He could hear everything. The growing murmur of the crowd, Dr. Mitchell's urgent radio calls for emergency medical support, the distant wail of sirens. But when he tried to lift his head, nothing happened. When he attempted to move his arms, they remained lifeless at his sides. The realization hit him with more force than Steelshot's hooves ever could. In the stands, Jessica Martinez pushed through the crowd at the rail, her nursing background making her acutely aware of what she was witnessing. She had watched Tommy ride dozens of bulls over their 2-year relationship, had seen him thrown and trampled and bruised, but she had never seen him lie so perfectly still. Her hands pressed against her mouth as she fought back the scream building in her throat. Just 3 hours earlier, Tommy had been the picture of confidence as he prepared for what he believed would be his breakthrough ride. The Hayes family name carried serious weight in Nevada rodeo circles. His grandfather William had won the Reno Championship in 1967. His father Robert had claimed the title twice before a knee injury ended his career. Tommy carried not just his own dreams into that arena, but 3 generations of legacy and the hopes of everyone who believed he was destined for greatness. The preparation had been meticulous. Tommy had spent months studying video footage of Steelshot, analyzing the bull's patterns, his preferred spin direction, the timing of his signature move where he launched riders high into the air with a violent shoulder twist. In a sport where 8 seconds separated heroes from has-beens, preparation was everything. Behind the chutes, Tommy had gone through his ritual with religious precision. Athletic tape wrapped around his riding hand in the exact pattern his father had taught him. Protective vest adjusted for maximum mobility without sacrificing safety. Black cowboy hat settled firmly on his head. His lucky boots, worn leather with steel reinforcement inherited from his grandfather, had carried him through hundreds of successful rides. The other riders watched with a mixture of respect and concern as Tommy prepared to face the legendary bull. In professional bull riding, competitors were family. They shared advice, celebrated victories together, and mourned each other's injuries. Everyone knew Tommy was challenging more than just an animal. He was going up against a legend that had destroyed 47 consecutive riders. Marcus Rodriguez, a grizzled veteran from Texas with 15 years of scars and stories, approached Tommy as he finished his preparations. The concern on Marcus's weathered face was genuine as he placed a calloused hand on the younger man's shoulder. "You sure about this, son? Steelshot isn't just another bull. He's ended careers. Hell, he's hospitalized more riders than some entire rodeos see in a year." Tommy looked up with the absolute certainty that had carried him through years of small-town competitions and regional events. His blue eyes showed no doubt, no fear, only the focused intensity of a young man who believed this was his moment to claim destiny. "I've been watching tape on him for months, Marcus. I know his moves better than he knows them himself. This is my hometown. My family's been champions here for decades. Tonight it's my turn." Marcus nodded slowly, recognizing the fire that burned in young competitors. He had felt it himself once, that absolute conviction that skill and determination could overcome any obstacle. Time and painful experience had taught him humility, but he remembered what it felt like to believe you were invincible. The crowd was electric as the evening's championship rounds approached. The Reno Rodeo was more than entertainment. It was a celebration of Western heritage, a connection to America's frontier spirit. Families came dressed in their finest Western wear, Children clutched cotton candy while watching their heroes risk everything for 8 seconds of glory. The scent of barbecue and popcorn mixed with arena dust and leather created an atmosphere that existed nowhere else on Earth. Jessica had secured a prime spot at the fence, close enough to see every detail of Tommy's upcoming ride. Her position as a registered nurse at renowned regional medical center made her more aware than most spectators of what could go wrong in the arena, but she also understood Tommy's passion. She had fallen in love not just with the man, but with his dedication, his fearlessness, and his unwavering pursuit of a dream that had been passed down through generations of Hayes men. As the announcer called Tommy's name over the arena speakers, 6,000 voices erupted in cheers. Local hero stories were the heart of rodeo culture, and everyone present understood they might be witnessing history. Tommy Hayes, grandson of a champion, son of a legend, about to take on the unrideable bull. The narrative was perfect, the kind of story that would be told in bars and barbershops across Nevada for decades. Tommy climbed the chute rails and looked down at Steelshot for the first time up close. The bull was massive, easily 2,000 pounds of pure muscle and bad attitude. His black coat gleamed under the arena lights, and his eyes held an intelligence that was genuinely unsettling. This wasn't just livestock. This was a competitor who understood the game and had never lost. The process of settling onto the bull was methodical and precise. Tommy lowered himself carefully onto Steelshot's broad back, feeling the animal's coiled power even in stillness. He worked his gloved hand into the bull rope, finding the perfect grip that would keep him connected without preventing a clean release when the ride ended. The rope was simultaneously his lifeline and his potential death trap. His free hand gripped the chute rail as he made final position adjustments. The crowd noise faded to background hum as Tommy entered the zone every elite athlete knows, where time slows and focus becomes laser-sharp. He could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong. He could feel Steelshot's breathing beneath him, the bull's muscles coiled like steel springs ready to explode. "You ready, Tommy?" The chute boss's voice cut through his concentration. Tommy nodded, his jaw set with determination that had been building his entire life. This was the moment everything had led to. 8 seconds. That's all he needed. 8 seconds to prove himself worthy of the Hayes legacy. 8 seconds to claim his place among rodeo royalty. 8 seconds to change everything. Outside, Tommy called, the traditional signal that he was ready for the gate to open. The chute gate swung wide, and Steelshot erupted into the arena like a black explosion of fury and power. The bull's opening move was a violent spin left, exactly what Tommy had anticipated from months of video study. He adjusted his balance instinctively, keeping his free arm extended for stability, his riding arm locked in perfect position. For the first 3 seconds, he was in complete control, moving with the bull's rhythm like a dancer following music only he could hear. Then Steelshot changed everything. The bull planted his front hooves and launched his hindquarters skyward in a move so violent and unexpected that Tommy felt his careful positioning shatter instantly. His body was thrown forward, then whipped backward with a force that rattled his teeth and blurred his vision. The crowd gasped collectively as they watched the young rider struggle desperately to maintain his connection to the spinning, bucking tornado beneath him. At the 5-second mark, Tommy was still mounted, but barely. His form was deteriorating rapidly, his balance compromised by Steelshot's unpredictable assault. The bull seemed to sense weakness like a predator smelling blood, responding with increased fury, spinning faster, jumping higher, using every ounce of his massive frame to dislodge the human who dared attempt to ride him. 6 seconds. Steelshot planted all 4 hooves and twisted his enormous shoulders in opposite directions, creating a torque that no human body could possibly withstand. Tommy felt his grip failing, felt his body being torn away from the bull's back. This was the moment every bull rider knew would eventually come, when holding on became impossible and letting go became survival. But Tommy's hand wouldn't release from the rope. Whether it was adrenaline, desperation, or simple catastrophic bad luck, his gloved hand remained tangled in the bull rope as Steelshot launched into his signature finishing move. The bull dropped his massive head low and kicked his back legs high, creating a catapult effect that sent Tommy sailing through the air. But instead of flying free and rolling to safety as he had done hundreds of times before, Tommy's trapped hand yanked him back down toward the arena floor at the worst possible angle. He hit the ground neck first with a sound that would haunt everyone who heard it for the rest of their lives. Tommy's body crumpled and went completely still, his neck bent at an angle that made experienced cowboys and medical professionals immediately understand that something had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Dr. Mitchell's boots pounding across the arena dirt and her urgent radio calls for emergency backup. Steelshot, his job complete, snorted once and trotted to the far end of the arena as if nothing significant had happened. For him, it was just another successful defense of his perfect record. For Tommy Hayes, it was the end of everything he had ever known about himself, and the beginning of a future he could never have imagined. Dr. Mitchell reached Tommy within seconds, her trained hands immediately assessing his condition while being extremely careful not to move his head or neck. 8 years as the rodeo's chief medical officer had prepared her for broken bones, concussions, and internal injuries, but she had never encountered anything like this. Tommy's eyes were open and alert, but when she asked him to wiggle his fingers, nothing happened. When she asked him to move his toes, there was no response. "Tommy, can you hear me?" she asked, her voice professionally calm despite the chaos of emotions inside her. "I can hear you," Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible over the growing sound of approaching sirens. "But I can't feel anything. I can't move anything. What's happening to me?" The question hung in the Nevada air like a prayer that would never be answered the way Tommy hoped. Dr. Mitchell continued her assessment, checking pupils, testing what reflexes remained, and preparing Tommy for transport while trying to maintain the professional composure that had carried her through hundreds of medical emergencies. Jessica Martinez was being held back by arena security, but she could see enough to understand that her world had just been completely destroyed. The man she loved, the fearless bull rider who had seemed invincible just minutes before, was lying motionless in the dirt while paramedics worked frantically to stabilize his condition for transport. The crowd of 6,000 sat in stunned silence as emergency medical technicians carefully immobilized Tommy's neck and spine before loading him onto a backboard and then into the waiting ambulance. The Reno Rodeo, an event that celebrated courage, tradition, and the triumph of human will over seemingly impossible odds, had become the scene of a tragedy that would forever change everyone who witnessed it. As the ambulance doors closed with a finality that seemed to echo through the desert night, Tommy Hayes was carried away from the arena where 3 generations of his family had made their mark, toward a hospital where doctors would deliver news that would shatter not just his dreams, but his entire understanding of what it meant to be alive. The last thing Tommy saw before the morphine took effect was the arena lights growing smaller through the ambulance's rear window, taking with them everything he had ever believed about his future, his identity, and his purpose in the world. Renowned Regional Medical Center's Trauma Bay had seen its share of rodeo injuries over the years, but the urgency surrounding Tommy Hayes' arrival was unlike anything the staff had experienced. Dr. Amanda Foster, the hospital's lead trauma surgeon, had been monitoring radio communications from the arena and knew this case would be career-defining, both for her and for the young man whose life hung in the balance. Tommy remained conscious throughout the initial examination, his mind sharp and alert even as his body refused to respond to the most basic commands. The cervical collar immobilized his head completely, but he could hear everything. The beeping of monitors, the hushed conversations between medical staff, the clinical terminology that he didn't understand but instinctively knew wasn't good. The emergency room buzzed with controlled chaos as Tommy was wheeled through the automatic doors. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency, hooking up 4 lines and monitoring equipment while Dr. Foster began her comprehensive neurological assessment. Every test confirmed what she had suspected from the moment she saw the initial CT scan images. "Tommy, I'm Dr. Foster. I need you to try to move your fingers for me," she said, her voice gentle but clinical. Tommy concentrated with everything he had, willing his fingers to respond, but nothing happened. The disconnect between his brain's commands and his body's complete lack of response was terrifying in a way that facing down angry bulls had never been. "I'm trying," he whispered, sweat beading on his forehead from the effort. "I'm trying as hard as I can, but nothing's happening." Dr. Foster continued her examination methodically, testing reflexes that weren't there, checking for sensations that had vanished, documenting the extent of damage that would reshape Tommy's entire existence. Her years of medical training had taught her to maintain professional detachment, but something about this young man's situation cut through her clinical armor. In the waiting room, the Hayes family and their extended rodeo community had gathered in a vigil that would last through the night. Robert Hayes paced the narrow corridor like a caged animal, his weathered hands opening and closing into fists as he struggled with helplessness that was foreign to his nature. As a former champion bull rider himself, he had always believed that courage and determination could overcome any obstacle. This situation offered no target for his fighting spirit. Linda Hayes sat in a plastic chair that seemed designed to be uncomfortable, clutching Jessica's hand while staring at the doors that separated her from her son. She had been the strength of the Hayes family through decades of rodeo life, patching up injuries, providing comfort through disappointments, and celebrating victories. But nothing in her experience had prepared her for this level of catastrophe. Jessica Martinez felt like she was drowning in a nightmare that refused to end. Just hours ago, she had kissed Tommy goodbye as he prepared for what they both believed would be his breakthrough performance. Now she sat in a hospital waiting room, surrounded by the smell of disinfectant and the sound of medical equipment, while the man she loved fought for his future in ways that had nothing to do with courage or skill. Marcus Rodriguez and several other riders from the professional bull riders circuit had driven straight from the arena to the hospital. Word traveled fast in the tight-knit rodeo community, and everyone who knew Tommy understood that this wasn't just another injury. The way he had fallen, the way he had remained motionless in the arena dirt, told its own story to those experienced enough to read the signs. 24 years old, Marcus muttered to another rider, shaking his head in disbelief. Kid had everything going for him. Best seat I've seen in years, perfect technique, fearless as they come. And now, the sentence hung unfinished because everyone present understood what now meant, even if they weren't ready to voice it. Hours crawled by as Tommy was moved through various stages of testing and evaluation. Each scan, each consultation with specialists, each medical procedure painted a clearer and more devastating picture of what had happened during those 6 seconds in the arena. The impact had severely compressed his 5th cervical vertebra, causing bone fragments to damage his spinal cord in ways that would forever alter the trajectory of his life. Dr. Foster finally approached the waiting room at 4 a.m, her expression carefully controlled, but her eyes revealing the weight of the news she carried. The assembled group of family and friends looked up at her with a mixture of desperate hope and overwhelming dread, knowing that the next few minutes would define everything that followed. "I need to speak with Tommy's immediate family," she said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of gravity that made everyone present understand that whatever came next would be permanent. Robert and Linda Hayes, along with Jessica, followed Dr. Foster to a small consultation room designed to deliver life-changing news. The space featured soft lighting and comfortable furniture, but nothing could soften the impact of what they were about to hear. "Tommy has suffered a severe spinal cord injury at the C5 level," Dr. Foster began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was explaining. "The vertebra was compressed during his fall, and bone fragments have caused extensive damage to the spinal cord. I want to be completely honest with you about what this means for his future." Linda Hayes gripped her husband's hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Jessica felt the room spinning around her as Dr. Foster continued with clinical precision that somehow made the news even more devastating. "Tommy will be paralyzed from the chest down permanently. He will retain some limited function in his shoulders and upper arms, but he will not regain the use of his hands, his trunk muscles, or his legs. He will require assistance with most activities of daily living for the rest of his life." The words hit like physical blows, each one landing with the force of Steelshot's hooves. Robert Hayes, who had spent his life facing down dangerous animals and accepting calculated risks, found himself confronting a reality for which no amount of courage or experience could have prepared him. His son would never walk again. He would never ride again. He would never be the same person who had climbed onto that bull's back with such confidence just hours before. "Are you saying there's no chance of recovery?" Linda asked, her voice breaking on the words. "No possibility that he might regain some function over time?" Dr. Foster's expression was compassionate, but unflinchingly realistic. With C5 complete spinal cord injuries, recovery of motor function below the level of damage is extremely rare. There have been significant advances in spinal cord research, and aggressive rehabilitation can help maximize whatever function he does retain, but I have to be honest with you. The damage is extensive and permanent. Jessica finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Can we see him? He's being moved to the intensive care unit now. The next 72 hours will be critical for monitoring any additional swelling in the spinal cord and preventing secondary complications. You can see him, but only for brief visits." When they entered Tommy's ICU room, The sight was overwhelming in ways that no amount of mental preparation could have lessened. The young man who had been so vibrantly physical just hours before was now connected to multiple machines, his body motionless beneath white hospital sheets. His face was pale but alert, his eyes immediately finding theirs with an expression that seemed to contain a lifetime of questions. "Mom, Dad." Tommy's voice was weak but clear. "Jessica? The doctor already talked to me. She explained everything." His voice caught slightly before he continued. "I'm never going to walk again, am I? I'm never going to ride again." The questions hung in the sterile air like accusations against a universe that had allowed such a thing to happen to someone so young, so talented, so full of promise. Linda Hayes broke down completely, her sobs echoing off the hospital room walls. Robert struggled to maintain the composure that had carried him through decades of challenges, but standing beside his son's bed, he felt more helpless than he had ever imagined possible. "Son," Robert finally managed, his voice rough with emotions he had never learned to express, "you're alive. That's what matters right now. You're still here, you're still you, and everything else we'll figure out as we go." Tommy closed his eyes, processing not just the physical reality of his condition, but the emotional weight of what it meant for every aspect of his future. 24 years old, and his life had been divided into two distinct parts, before the fall and after the fall. Everything he had planned, everything he had worked toward, everything that had defined his identity had been erased in 6 seconds. "I was so close," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I could feel it, you know? I was going to make the full 8 seconds. I was going to be the first rider to conquer Steelshot. I could feel it happening." Jessica moved closer to his bed, taking his hand in hers even though he couldn't feel her touch. "You're going to do amazing things, Tommy. This doesn't change who you are inside." But even as she spoke the words, Jessica wondered if she believed them herself. The man she had fallen in love with was defined by his physicality, his fearlessness, his connection to a world of danger and adrenaline. How could that person exist in a wheelchair, dependent on others for the most basic functions of daily life? Over the following days, Tommy's room became an unofficial gathering place for the entire rodeo community. Riders, stock contractors, arena workers, and fans made pilgrimages to pay their respects and offer support. The Professional Bull Riders Organization sent representatives, and discussions began immediately about benefit events and fundraising campaigns to help with the mounting medical expenses. But through all the visits and well wishes, Tommy struggled with a depression that seemed as overwhelming as his physical injuries. The young man who had never encountered a challenge he wouldn't accept, who had built his entire identity around his ability to face danger with a smile, found himself confronting a future that seemed to offer nothing but limitations, dependence, and compromise. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the hospital's spinal cord injury specialist, became a frequent visitor to Tommy's room. She had worked with hundreds of patients in similar situations over her 15-year career, and she understood that the emotional adjustment to a catastrophic spinal cord injury was often more challenging than the physical aspects. "I know this seems impossible right now," she told Tommy during one of their early sessions. "I know it feels like your life is over, like everything that made you who you are has been taken away. But I've seen patients with injuries identical to yours go on to live full, meaningful, satisfying lives. It's different from what you planned, but it doesn't have to be less than what you planned." Tommy's response was bitter and immediate. "Easy for you to say, document. You can walk out of here at the end of your shift and go home to your normal life. You don't have to figure out how to exist when everything that made you who you are is gone." Dr. Walsh didn't take offense at his anger. She had heard similar responses countless times before, and she understood that anger was often a necessary stage in the process of accepting a completely altered reality. "You're absolutely right. I can't truly understand what you're going through. But I can tell you that the patients I've seen succeed in rebuilding their lives are the ones who eventually find new definitions of strength, independence, and purpose." The conversation that would begin to change Tommy's perspective came from a completely unexpected source. Jake Morrison, a former bull rider who had suffered a similar injury 3 years earlier, arrived at Tommy's room on a Thursday afternoon without fanfare or advance notice. Jake rolled his wheelchair into the room with the confidence of someone who had long ago made peace with circumstances beyond his control. "Heard about what happened," Jake said without preamble, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had been exactly where Tommy was now. "Thought you might want to talk to somebody who's walked this path before." "Well, rolled this path, I guess." Tommy looked at Jake with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Here was someone who understood exactly what he was experiencing, but also someone who represented a future that Tommy wasn't sure he wanted to accept or even acknowledge as possible. "How do you do it?" Tommy asked with brutal directness. "How do you get up every morning knowing that everything is different now, that you'll never be who you used to be?" Jake's answer was honest and uncompromising. "The first year was absolute hell, and I won't lie to you about that. I spent months feeling sorry for myself, pushing away everyone who tried to help, convinced that my life was effectively over. I tried to drink myself to death, burned through most of my savings, and alienated almost everyone who cared about me. But eventually, I realized I had a choice. I could spend whatever time I had left mourning who I used to be, or I could figure out who I was going to become." "And what did you become?" Jake smiled for the first time since entering the room. "I became someone who helps other people navigate situations like ours. I work for a nonprofit organization that provides equipment and support for people with spinal cord injuries. I've been married for 2 years to an incredible woman who sees me for who I am now, not who I used to be. I've found ways to stay connected to rodeo that don't require climbing on the back of an angry bull." Their conversation continued for more than 2 hours, covering everything from the practical aspects of daily life with a spinal cord injury to the emotional challenges of completely redefining success, happiness, and self-worth. Jake didn't offer false hope or empty platitudes. Instead, he provided something far more valuable: concrete proof that life could continue, even thrive, after everything changed. As Jake prepared to leave, he turned back to Tommy with a final thought that would resonate long after he was gone. "The hardest part isn't learning to live in a wheelchair, Tommy. The hardest part is learning to see yourself as someone who deserves to be happy again. When you're ready to start that process, there are a lot of people who want to help you get there." That night, Tommy lay awake staring at the ceiling, processing his conversation with Jake, and beginning to consider the possibility that his future might hold more than just loss and limitation. It wasn't acceptance yet, and it certainly wasn't happiness, but it was the first crack in the wall of despair that had surrounded him since his accident. The road ahead would be longer and more difficult than anything he had ever imagined facing. But for the first time since falling from Steelshot's back, Tommy Hayes began to consider the possibility that his story might not be ending. It might simply be beginning an entirely new chapter. If this story has already moved you, subscribe to the channel and leave your like so you don't miss any of our stories. The Craig Hospital in Englewood, Colorado, specialized in what most people considered impossible: teaching individuals with catastrophic injuries how to rebuild their lives from the ground up. 3 months after his accident, Tommy Hayes arrived there via medical transport, leaving behind the familiar landscape of Nevada for a facility that would become his world for the next 8 months. The rehabilitation wing buzzed with activity that challenged every assumption Tommy had developed about disability. Physical therapists worked with patients on specialized equipment that seemed designed by engineers and dreamers. Occupational therapists taught adaptive techniques that transformed basic daily activities into achievable goals. Counselors provided emotional support for psychological adjustments that often proved more challenging than the physical adaptations. Dr. Michael Chun, Tommy's lead rehabilitation physician, had reviewed his file extensively before their first meeting. Tommy's injury was classified as an incomplete C5 spinal cord injury, meaning some minimal sensation and muscle function remained below the level of damage. While this offered slightly more hope than a complete injury, the functional difference in daily life would be marginal. Tommy would still require assistance with most activities and would never regain the use of his legs. Tommy's first weeks at Craig were marked by resistance that bordered on hostility. Unlike many patients who arrived motivated to begin the adaptation process, Tommy seemed determined to prove that his situation was hopeless. He refused to participate in therapy sessions, barely communicated with medical staff, and spent most of his time staring out his room window at the Colorado mountains. Sarah Kim, his occupational therapist, had encountered difficult patients before, but Tommy's case presented unique challenges. Most patients eventually showed some interest in learning adaptive techniques, even if they struggled with emotional acceptance. Tommy seemed to view every attempted intervention as a betrayal of who he used to be. "I don't need to learn how to put on a shirt with a button hook," Tommy snapped during one of their early sessions. "I need to learn how to ride bulls again. Since that's never going to happen, I don't need to learn anything else." Sarah's response was patient but firm. "Right now, someone has to help you get dressed every morning. Learning to do it yourself, even if the method is different from before, means you get to decide when you wake up, what you wear, and how you start your day. That's not about giving up who you were. That's about taking control of who you are now. The breakthrough began during Tommy's 4th week at Craig, though it started with what appeared to be another devastating setback. Jessica had driven from Reno to visit, and their relationship was showing severe strain from 3 months of dealing with a reality neither of them had been prepared to face. "I miss you," she said quietly during one particularly difficult visit. "I miss the Tommy who used to make me laugh, who used to talk about his dreams and plans, who used to see possibilities instead of just problems everywhere he looked." Tommy's response was harsh and immediate. "That Tommy died in that arena in Reno, Jessica. He's gone, and he's never coming back. What you're looking at now is what's left, and it's not much. If you want someone who can make you laugh and talk about dreams, you should probably start looking somewhere else." Jessica left that day in tears, and Tommy convinced himself he was doing her a favor by pushing her away. But the encounter forced him to confront the reality that his anger and self-pity weren't just destroying his own future. They were devastating the people who genuinely cared about him. That evening, Tommy encountered David Rodriguez in the hospital's recreation room. David was a 28-year-old former Marine who had suffered a spinal cord injury from an IED explosion in Afghanistan. He had been at Craig for 5 months, working systematically toward the goal of independent living, and his progress was remarkable. David could transfer himself from wheelchair to bed, dress himself completely, drive a modified vehicle, and had recently started taking college courses online. "You know what I learned in the Marines?" David asked as they sat together watching a basketball game on television. "I learned that feeling sorry for yourself is a luxury you can't afford when people are depending on you to be strong." Tommy bristled immediately at the comment. "Nobody's depending on me anymore. That's kind of the whole point of this situation." David's response was direct and challenging. "Your girlfriend drove 8 hours to see you, and you treated her like garbage. Your parents call this place every single day asking about your progress. There's an entire community of people in Nevada organizing fundraisers and praying for your recovery. You think none of those people are depending on you to find a way to be okay?" The conversation continued for more than 2 hours, with David sharing his own story of adjustment and gradual recovery. He talked about the dark period immediately after his injury when he had seriously considered suicide, about the slow and often frustrating process of learning to see himself as a complete person again, and about the unexpected directions his life had taken as he gradually embraced new possibilities. "I'm not telling you it's easy," David concluded. "I'm telling you it's possible. But you have to decide you want it to be possible. Nobody can make that choice for you." The next morning, Tommy asked Sarah Kim to restart his occupational therapy sessions. His attitude remained guarded and skeptical, but for the first time since his accident, he seemed willing to engage with the process of learning adaptive techniques. Sarah was careful not to make a dramatic production of his change in approach, understanding that patients in Tommy's situation often took steps backward as well as forward. Learning to dress himself proved more complicated than Tommy had anticipated. Something as simple as putting on a t-shirt required a completely different approach when you couldn't use your hands normally and had no trunk stability. Sarah taught him to lay the shirt out flat, roll it up from the bottom, put his arms through the sleeves first, then pull it over his head using a rocking motion. It took him 45 minutes to put on a shirt that he used to pull on in 5 seconds. "This is ridiculous," Tommy muttered after his 3rd attempt resulted in getting tangled in the fabric. "This isn't independence. This is just a different kind of helplessness." "The first time you rode a bull, how long did you stay on?" Sarah asked. "About 2 seconds before I got thrown into the dirt." "And how long did it take you to ride for 8 seconds?" Tommy was quiet for a moment, understanding her point. "About 3 years of constant practice and getting thrown more times than I can count." "This is the same thing, Tommy. It's learning a new skill that takes time, practice, and patience. The difference is that instead of learning to ride bulls, you're learning to live independently again." Physical therapy presented even greater challenges. Mark Sullivan, Tommy's physical therapist, was a former Paralympic athlete who had lost both legs in a motorcycle accident 15 years earlier. Mark understood better than most people the psychological barriers that often proved more difficult than the physical limitations. "We're going to focus on maximizing whatever function you do have," Mark explained during their first session. "You have some movement in your shoulders and upper arms. We're going to strengthen those muscles and teach you how to use them more effectively." The work was exhausting and often frustrating, Simple exercises that targeted his remaining muscle groups left Tommy feeling drained in ways that 8-second bull rides never had. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, he began to notice improvements. His shoulder strength increased. His balance while sitting improved. His endurance for basic activities extended. The real breakthrough came during his 6th week at Craig, when Tommy successfully transferred himself from his bed to his wheelchair without assistance for the first time. The accomplishment might have seemed minor to someone who had never faced such challenges, but for Tommy, it represented a fundamental shift in how he viewed his capabilities. "How does it feel?" Mark asked as Tommy sat in his wheelchair, slightly out of breath, but undeniably proud of what he had just accomplished. "Like maybe I'm not completely helpless after all," Tommy admitted. Word of Tommy's progress began to spread beyond the walls of Craig Hospital. The rodeo community had been following his story closely, and news that he was beginning to participate in rehabilitation generated an outpouring of support that surprised him. Letters arrived daily from fellow riders, fans, and people he had never met who had been inspired by his story. One letter in particular caught his attention. It came from Maria Santos, a teenage girl from Texas whose brother had been paralyzed in a car accident 2 years earlier. She wrote about watching Tommy's accident on television and how his story had helped her family understand that catastrophic injuries didn't have to mean the end of hope. "Reading about your progress in rehabilitation has shown us that our family can get through this too," she wrote. "My brother is starting to believe that he can have a future again, and that's because of your example." The letter hit Tommy harder than any bull ever had. For the first time since his accident, he realized that his actions and choices weren't just affecting his own life. People he had never met were watching his journey, drawing strength from his struggles, and finding hope in his small victories. Dr. Walsh noticed the change in Tommy's demeanor during their next counseling session. "You seem different today. More engaged, more present. What's changed?" Tommy showed her Maria's letter, along with several others that had arrived that week. "I never thought about other people being affected by what I do or don't do. I've been so focused on what I lost that I didn't consider what I might still be able to give." "And what do you think you might be able to give?" Tommy was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously for the first time. "Maybe hope. Maybe proof that you can survive something like this and still be human." The conversation marked a turning point in Tommy's rehabilitation. He began approaching his therapy sessions with genuine determination rather than grudging compliance. He started asking questions about adaptive equipment, techniques for independent living, and possibilities for future activities. Most importantly, he began to envision a life beyond the hospital walls. Jessica's next visit was dramatically different from their previous encounters. Tommy had called her the night before, the first time he had initiated contact since his accident. His voice on the phone had carried a quality she hadn't heard in months. Genuine engagement with the present moment rather than bitter dwelling on the past. "I owe you an apology," Tommy said as soon as she entered his room. "I've been treating you terribly, and you didn't deserve any of it. I was so angry about what happened to me that I took it out on the people who cared about me most." Jessica sat down beside his bed, hope and caution warring in her expression. "I understand why you were angry, Tommy. I can't imagine going through what you've experienced. But I also can't keep watching you destroy yourself and push away everyone who loves you. I know, and I'm not asking you to pretend that everything is suddenly okay, because it's not. But I'm starting to think that maybe okay doesn't have to look the way I always thought it would." They talked for hours that day, really talked in a way they hadn't since before his accident. Tommy shared what he was learning in rehabilitation, the small victories that were beginning to add up to something larger. Jessica talked about her own struggles with watching him suffer, her fears about their future together, and her relief at seeing glimpses of the man she had fallen in love with. "I don't know what our future looks like," Tommy said as their visit was ending. "I can't promise you the life we planned before. But if you're willing to figure it out with me, I'd like to try." Jessica's answer came through tears that were equal parts grief for what they had lost and hope for what they might still build together. "I've never wanted anything more than to figure it out with you." Tommy's progress accelerated dramatically over the following weeks. He mastered transfers from his wheelchair to various surfaces. He learned to navigate curbs, ramps, and uneven terrain. He developed techniques for cooking simple meals from his wheelchair. Most importantly, he began to see these skills not as consolation prizes for what he couldn't do, but as genuine accomplishments that expanded his independence. The hardest lesson came when Mark introduced him to driving an adapted vehicle. The hand controls felt alien after a lifetime of using his feet, and Tommy struggled with the coordination required to operate the car safely. After his third failed attempt to navigate a simple parking lot course, he broke down completely. "I can't do this," he said, tears of frustration streaming down his face. "I can't even drive a car. How am I supposed to live independently if I can't drive?" Mark's response was gentle but firm. "Do you remember the first time you tried to ride a bull? I got thrown in about 2 seconds and thought I was going to die. And what did you do the next day?" "I got back on another bull." This is the same thing, Tommy. New skill, new muscle memory, new coordination patterns. It takes time to develop. The only difference is that now you're learning to drive instead of learning to ride. By his 7th attempt, Tommy successfully completed the driving course. The feeling of independence that came with controlling a vehicle again was intoxicating. He could go places, make choices about where to be and when to be there. It was a kind of freedom he had thought was lost forever. As Tommy's 8-month stay at Craig Hospital neared its end, the medical team began preparing him for the transition back to independent living. Dr. Chin reviewed his progress with obvious satisfaction, noting improvements that had exceeded initial expectations. "You've made remarkable progress, Tommy. When you arrived here, you were completely dependent on others for every aspect of daily living. Now you can dress yourself, transfer independently, drive an adapted vehicle, and manage most daily activities on your own. More importantly, you've developed the problem-solving skills and emotional resilience that will serve you well as you face new challenges." The plan was for Tommy to return to Nevada, where his parents had modified their home to accommodate his wheelchair. He would continue outpatient therapy, explore vocational rehabilitation options, and gradually rebuild his life in the community where he had grown up. But Tommy had other ideas. "I want to stay involved with spinal cord injury rehabilitation," he told Dr. Chin during their final session. "I want to help other people going through what I went through. I've been thinking about going back to school, maybe studying counseling or social work." Dr. Chin smiled, recognizing the transformation that had taken place over the past 8 months. "I think that's an excellent idea. You have something valuable to offer other patients, the credibility that comes from having walked this path yourself." Tommy's final day at Craig Hospital was bittersweet. He had arrived there as a broken young man who saw only limitations and loss in his future. He was leaving as someone who understood that catastrophic change didn't have to mean catastrophic failure. The future still looked different from what he had planned, but it no longer looked empty. Dr. Walsh stopped by his room as he was packing his belongings. "Any advice you'd give to the next young man who comes in here after a spinal cord injury?" Tommy considered the question carefully. "I'd tell him that the person he was before isn't gone. That person is still there, still valuable, still capable of amazing things. He just has to learn new ways to express who he is and what he can contribute to the world." As Tommy's modified van pulled away from Craig Hospital, he looked back at the building that had been his world for 8 months. It had been the place where he learned that strength could be redefined, that independence could be rebuilt, and that hope could survive even the most devastating circumstances. The road ahead would still be challenging. There would be days when the weight of his limitations felt overwhelming. There would be moments when he mourned the life he had planned and lost. But he was no longer the same person who had fallen from Steelshot's back in that arena in Reno. He was someone who had learned to fight again, not against bulls, but for something even more important: the chance to build a meaningful life from the pieces of a shattered dream. 2 years after his accident, Tommy Hayes rolled his wheelchair into the rehabilitation wing of Renown Regional Medical Center, the same hospital where he had received the devastating news that changed his life forever. But this time, he wasn't there as a patient. He was there as a peer counselor, part of the hospital's new spinal cord injury support program that he had helped develop. The irony wasn't lost on him. The place that had once represented the end of everything he thought he wanted had become the foundation for a purpose he never could have imagined. Tommy had completed his bachelor's degree in rehabilitation counseling through online courses, graduated with honors, and immediately applied for a position helping other spinal cord injury patients navigate the emotional and practical challenges he knew so well. His first official case was David Chun, a 19-year-old college student who had been paralyzed in a diving accident 3 weeks earlier. David's injury was remarkably similar to Tommy's own. C5 incomplete, permanent paralysis from the chest down, devastating dreams of an athletic career cut short. The young man lay in his hospital bed with the same expression of hopeless anger that Tommy remembered seeing in his own reflection during those dark early days. "They said you wanted to talk to me," David said without looking up when Tommy entered the room. "I don't really see the point. Unless you've got some miracle cure hidden in that wheelchair, I don't think there's much to discuss." Tommy positioned his wheelchair beside the bed and settled in for what he knew would be a long conversation. No miracle cures. Just someone who's been exactly where you are right now and lived to tell about it. Great. Another inspirational speaker come to tell me how I can overcome anything if I just think positive thoughts. Thanks, but I've heard enough of that crap already. Tommy's response surprised David with its directness. Actually, I was going to tell you that this sucks. It's going to keep sucking for a while, and anyone who tells you otherwise is lying. The question isn't whether this is terrible. It is. The question is what you're going to do with the fact that it's terrible. David finally looked at Tommy with genuine interest. And what did you do with it? For the first few months, I wallowed in self-pity and pushed away everyone who tried to help me. I was convinced my life was over, and I did everything I could to make that belief come true. Then I met some people who showed me that being paralyzed doesn't mean being powerless. Tommy spent the next hour sharing his story, not the sanitized, inspirational version that people sometimes expected, but the real story complete with setbacks, failures, and moments of despair. He talked about learning to transfer from his bed to his wheelchair, about the frustration of needing 45 minutes to put on a shirt, about the day he cried because he couldn't open a jar of peanut butter. But he also talked about the victories. The first time he drove his adapted car, the pride he felt when he moved into his own apartment, the satisfaction of completing his degree, and the unexpected joy he had found in helping other people face similar challenges. "So what's your life like now?" David asked, his skepticism beginning to soften into curiosity. "Different from what I planned, but not less than what I planned. I have my own place, a job I love, relationships that matter to me. I travel to speak at hospitals and rehabilitation centers. I've learned to ski again using adaptive equipment. I'm even dating someone pretty amazing." That last detail caught David's attention. "Dating? How does that work?" Tommy smiled, remembering asking Jake Morrison the same question during his own early days of recovery. "Pretty much the same way it worked before, except now I have to think about whether restaurants are wheelchair accessible. Turns out that if someone is going to reject you because you use a wheelchair, they weren't worth your time anyway." Jessica Martinez had indeed stuck with Tommy through his rehabilitation and beyond. Their relationship had been tested in ways that most couples never faced, but it had emerged stronger and deeper than either of them had expected. She had completed her nursing degree and now worked in the same spinal cord injury unit where Tommy provided counseling services. The hardest part wasn't adjusting to his wheelchair, Jessica had told another family member recently. The hardest part was watching him rediscover who he was and learning to love the person he became. But the person he became turned out to be even more amazing than the person he was before. Tommy's work at the hospital was just one part of a life that had grown richer and more meaningful than he could have imagined during those dark days at Craig Hospital. He had become involved with several nonprofit organizations that supported people with disabilities. He spoke regularly at high schools and colleges about overcoming adversity. He had even returned to the world of rodeo, not as a competitor, but as an advocate for improved safety standards and support services for injured riders. The Professional Bull Riders Organization had embraced Tommy as a spokesman for their safety initiatives. His accident had sparked important conversations about protective equipment, medical protocols, and support systems for riders who suffered career-ending injuries. Tommy found deep satisfaction in knowing that his experience might prevent other families from going through what his family had endured. "I can't change what happened to me," he often said during his speaking engagements. "But if my story helps improve safety for other riders, or helps one family cope better with a similar tragedy, then maybe there was a purpose to it all." The most unexpected development in Tommy's new life was his return to competitive sports. He had discovered wheelchair racing during his final months at Craig Hospital and found that the speed, strategy, and physical demands satisfied the same competitive drive that had made him a successful bull rider. He wasn't Olympic-level material, but he was competitive in regional events and found genuine joy in pushing his racing wheelchair to its limits. "It's not the same as riding bulls," he explained to a reporter who interviewed him after winning a 10K race in San Francisco. "But it gives me the same feeling of testing myself against challenging odds. The difference is that now when I cross the finish line, I know I'll be going home in the same condition I started in. Tommy's parents had initially struggled with his transformation more than anyone expected. Robert Hayes had eventually found peace with his son's new path, but it had taken time for him to understand that Tommy's achievements in his new life were just as valid as his accomplishments in the arena had been. "I kept waiting for him to get back to normal," Robert admitted during a family dinner celebrating Tommy's college graduation. "It took me too long to realize that he had gotten back to normal. It just wasn't the normal any of us expected." Linda Hayes had thrown herself into supporting Tommy's advocacy work, becoming a volunteer with several organizations that served families dealing with spinal cord injuries. She often said that while she would give anything to undo Tommy's accident, she was proud of the man he had become and the lives he was touching through his work. The conversation with David Chun continued through several more sessions over the following weeks. Tommy watched the young man progress through the same stages he remembered so well: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and eventually tentative acceptance. Not every patient made this journey successfully, and Tommy had learned not to take the failures personally, but David showed signs of the resilience that would serve him well in the years ahead. "I've been thinking about what you said," David told Tommy during one of their sessions. "About being paralyzed not meaning being powerless. I'm starting to understand what you meant." "What do you think I meant?" "I think you meant that I get to decide what my life means, wheelchair or no wheelchair. I can choose to focus on what I can't do anymore, or I can figure out what I can do now." Tommy nodded, recognizing the moment when understanding began to transform into acceptance. "That's exactly what I meant. And once you figure out what you can do now, you might be surprised by how much that turns out to be." 6 months later, Tommy received a text message from David with a photo attached. The image showed David in his racing wheelchair, crossing the finish line at a local 5K race with a broad smile on his face. The message read, "Thanks for showing me that the race isn't over. It just changed courses." Tommy's office at the hospital was decorated with dozens of similar photos and messages from patients he had worked with over the years. Each one represented a life that had been rebuilt from devastating circumstances, a family that had found hope again, or a person who had discovered strength they never knew they possessed. Dr. Walsh, who had provided Tommy's counseling during his own recovery, now served as his supervisor in the peer counseling program. She often marveled at the transformation she had witnessed, not just in Tommy's circumstances, but in his fundamental approach to life. "You've become the person you needed when you were lying in that ICU," she told him during one of their supervision meetings. "You're giving other patients something that no medical professional can provide, proof that this kind of catastrophic change doesn't have to be catastrophic failure." Tommy's relationship with Steelshot, the bull that had changed his life forever, had evolved in unexpected ways. The bull had been retired from competition after Tommy's accident, not because of any fault on the animal's part, but because the owner felt it was appropriate given the severity of the injury. Tommy had visited Steelshot at the ranch where he now lived, an encounter that provided closure he hadn't realized he needed. "I don't blame him," Tommy had told a documentary filmmaker who was creating a film about his story. "He was just doing what bulls do. I was the one who chose to climb on his back. What happened was a risk I accepted when I made that choice. The bull was just being a bull." The documentary, titled 8 Seconds to Forever, premiered at several film festivals and helped raise awareness about spinal cord injuries and the importance of comprehensive rehabilitation services. Tommy donated his portion of the proceeds to fund peer counseling programs at hospitals across the country. As Tommy approached the 3rd anniversary of his accident, he found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point. The young man who had climbed onto Steelshot's back with dreams of rodeo glory had indeed died in that arena. But the person who had emerged from the ashes of that death had built a life of purpose, meaning, and impact that the original Tommy Hayes could never have imagined. "People sometimes ask me if I would change what happened if I could," Tommy said during a speech at a spinal cord injury research fundraiser. "The honest answer is that I don't know. The accident took away the life I planned, but it gave me a life I never could have planned. It took away my ability to ride bulls, but it gave me the ability to help people ride out the worst storms of their lives. I can't say which is more valuable." The speech concluded with Tommy's signature message, one that had become a source of hope for hundreds of families facing similar challenges. "The 8 seconds I spent on Steelshot's back were the longest 8 seconds of my life. But every day since then has been proof that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of a better one. The fall didn't finish my story. It just taught me how to write a different ending. As Tommy left the podium that night to thunderous applause, he caught sight of Jessica in the audience, her face glowing with pride. Beside her sat David Chun, now a sophomore in college studying physical therapy, and Maria Santos, the young woman whose letter had helped Tommy understand the broader impact of his journey. The auditorium was filled with people whose lives had been touched by his story, proving that sometimes the most devastating falls can become the foundation for the most meaningful rises. Tommy Hayes had learned that courage wasn't about staying on a bull for 8 seconds. Real courage was about getting up every day and choosing to build something meaningful from whatever pieces life had left you. The longest 8 seconds of his life had become the first 8 seconds of a completely different, but ultimately more fulfilling, existence. The boy who had dreamed of conquering an unrideable bull had grown into a man who helped others conquer the seemingly unconquerable challenges life could throw at them. And in doing so, he had discovered that some victories are worth far more than any championship buckle could ever be. If this story has already moved you, subscribe to the channel and leave your like so you don't miss any of our stories.